G'day there. This term, the series that has been the focus of our teaching has been called Practice, with the idea being that a life following Jesus is one where he has given us a pretty good example and has been a great record kept of what it is that Jesus did and said and how he lived his life for the 3 years of his ministry that are a wonderful example for us to follow. And within the gospel narratives, I'm not sure if you've ever paid attention to it or not, but one of the things that we read over and over again are things like this. At the start of Mark's gospel, we read that the Spirit sent Jesus out into the desert. And shortly after that, we read that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and left the house and went to a solitary place where he prayed. Luke tells us that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. We read in Luke as well as in Mark that Jesus went up onto a mountainside to pray at times and spent the night praying. Matthew tells us that Jesus would go out by boat sometimes to solitary, lonely places. We read that often after teaching and spending time with multiple crowds, Jesus would go up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and he would be there alone. We read even in some of the most significant events in Scripture, such as the Transfiguration, where he was revealed as the Son of God to his closest friends. This happened on a mountainside away from everybody else. I'm not sure if you're getting the picture, but it seems that for Jesus there was real life and real relationship to be found in quiet and in solitude. In being alone in the wilderness, it seemed that Jesus was in fact not alone at all, but similar to his ancestor King David, who spoke of being led by still waters and being made to lie down in green pastures. For Jesus, it seemed that spending time often and alone in God's presence in the midst of this happening as part of his rhythm of life, as part of his practice, he found his soul being restored for what was ahead of him. Now, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that even a cursory reading of the Gospels gives us a sense that Jesus' closeness to his Father was proportional to the amount of time that he spent in his presence. Making a devotion to time was fundamental to Jesus' relationship with his Father. And that's not surprising, really. I mean, what's the key ingredient to all of our best relationships? At least one of those is time, right? And did you notice the types of places that Jesus went to in these scriptures? Mountainsides, the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes it's even described to us as simply the wilderness. You know, we're told that Jesus actually looked for and sought out solitary places. And so it would seem to me that it wasn't just time, but also place was another key ingredient to the cultivation of a life and a relationship that was lived in proximity and closeness to God. It was incredibly helpful, it would seem, for Jesus to be in natural places where it was just him and the Spirit of God together in quiet and in conversation. You know, I'm here at Cobbler Creek. This place isn't but 4 minutes or more from where we meet together for worship and where our school community is, and all other sorts of things happen that are part of our community life. But you know, the other day I hiked some of the trails around here with a local historian who is really now one of the caretakers of this reserve, and he told me that this place where I'm standing, there's a lot of evidence that exists here that for thousands and thousands of years the local Kaurna people used to harvest yams here on their cyclical routes of travel and on their way down to Semaphore for seasonal catches of fish. You know, much the same as our indigenous folks who had a regard for this land that they would farm from time to time, in much the same way as for these folks who had a sense of this place being sacred, being holy. They had a regard for it as being that which had an ability to sustain their life physically and as a community. And it's easy to imagine, in light of the scriptures that we've read, that Jesus was at home and at peace in places like this. It's considering that Jesus, some of his best friends were fishermen, it's easy to imagine that he would have been at home catching fish on the South Australian coast as well. But even today, if you stop for a little while in places like this and take some time to do nothing other than to breathe, you get a sense of the age of this place, that it's been here for a long time before any of us got here, and it will be here for a long time after we're all gone. But in practicing time spent in places like this, you get a sense of what Jesus was doing when we're told that he was alone. And we're told that Jesus was praying. And sometimes we can think of praying as words, and sure, prayer can be words, but prayer can also be simply understood as time in God's presence, or as Father Richard Rohr puts it, prayer can be understood as simply putting ourselves in the gaze of God's love. It's one of the reasons that one of my favorite illustrations about what prayer is, and maybe many of you would have heard me tell this story before, but famous news anchor from America, his name is Dan Rather, and he had the opportunity to spend some time and interview Mother Teresa in Calcutta. And after spending some time with her, he noted that she spent a lot of time every day in, day out in prayer, and that was in quietness, in silence. And eventually, when he had the chance to interview her, he asked, Mother Teresa, when you pray, what is it that you say? And she said, I don't say anything, I listen. And he said, well, okay. Well, when you pray, what is it that God says to you? And she said, well, he doesn't say anything, he listens. And then she went on to say, and if you can't understand that, I'm sorry, but I can't explain it to you. It's a great story, and I think it describes what Celtic Christians have understood or described as the thin place, the place where heaven and earth meet, where we can encounter God's Spirit in much the same way that we can encounter another person in relationship. I think it describes not just what was happening for Jesus, but what can still happen for us if we actually follow Jesus in his example of prayer. So, it's just 3 questions for you to take some time asking amongst the people of your life groups this weekend. And so I'd encourage you to answer these questions together, but make sure you're in groups small enough where everybody has the opportunity to share. So just some really practical questions. Let me ask you, what's the best time for you in the rhythm of your week, with consideration given to the natural makeup of your personality and the demands on your life? What's the best time of day or night for you to get away to a lonely place and encounter the Spirit of God? And then simply maybe share with your friends what has been a sacred or a holy place for you. What's a place in the world that you have had a sense of truly encountering the holy? Maybe had a sense of what Moses had a sense of when he encountered the burning bush and the voice of God that said to him, take off your sandals, for the place that you're standing is holy ground. And perhaps if you've got time and if you're keen, you might share with one another about anything that God has shown you lately during these times in these places. One of the scriptures that is close to my heart in regards to this whole idea of the practice of prayer has been to answer obediently to Jesus when he says, are you tired, worn out, maybe burned out on religion? And he says, come away with me. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. So my prayer for you today would be that as you share with one another about the stories of your own life and your encounter of God's Spirit, that you would have a sense of being invited into the unforced rhythms of God's grace. Grace and peace. Have a great life,